But I thought what I would do this morning is just give you a 2-minute quick December 31st sermon. And it's only 2 points, and I think it will carry you through the year. The first point is that you should read your Bible every day. That is one of the most important things that you can do. I don't care where, when, what time, what version. If you decide to read one verse, one chapter, one book, it doesn't matter. Just read your Bible every day. It's a good idea to have some kind of Bible reading plan. And the reason for that is that we sometimes have a different view of how we're doing than reality. If you have a Bible reading plan and you look at it and think, man, I missed like 6 days. I didn't realize that. I personally like to take the read through the Bible in 3 years plan because it's a chapter a day. If you get behind with life, as sometimes happens, you miss a day here, a day there, you only have a chapter or two to catch up on. It's not a big deal. But whatever you choose, that's the most important decision that you can make in 2018. The second that you can make is don't be a jerk. So if you put those two things together, I promise you're going to have a good year, better than last year. So you have those 2 key points for December 31st. This morning I'm going to speak about Genesis chapter 22, which is an unusual chapter. It's a chapter of Abraham going to sacrifice his son Isaac. I did a lot of research for this chapter. I read Bible commentaries, I've listened to people's sermons, checked, most importantly, Wikipedia, and all of these sources speak about Abraham. They talk about the great faith of Abraham, the obedience of Abraham, the difficulty of the task of Abraham. And no one seems to talk about Isaac. And I thought, humanly speaking, if Isaac happened to be among us, he would feel shortchanged. He would feel everybody talks about his dad and nobody talks about him. So I thought it would be only fair to have Isaac come and give his view of the events of that day. Second thing that makes this a very unusual chapter is it speaks about child sacrifice. Generally speaking, in the world we live in today, child sacrifice is frowned upon. And it wasn't until both of my boys became teenagers that I began to understand the wisdom of that concept. And I remember during one extremely difficult time, I went to Sharon and I said, it's in the Bible. Maybe it's an option. But it was her lack of faith that prevented us from going down that path. But if you think about it, it's really a strange thing. I mean, God, who, if I had to describe God in only one word, it would be that he's a God of love. And yet we have a God of love who asked not only a follower of his, but an obedient follower to sacrifice his only son. And these two ideas don't seem to fit together. So I hope this morning that through this story we will have a better idea of why God allowed such a thing to happen. This story is called Don't Talk to Me About Sacrifice, and it's the story of Isaac. There's a song, and every time I hear it, it reminds me of my mountaintop experience. It also reminds me of what a Dylan fan my father is. You know, Bob Dylan, whose real name is Robert Zimmerman, he's become my father's favorite musical descendant. I can't tell you how many times I've heard Dylan tunes coming out of his heavenly tent. And if it's a really good day, Dad even thinks he is Bob. He stands out in front of his tent. The answer, my friends, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Yeah, I know. Sorry. I'm talking to all of you like you know who my father is. And if you don't know who my father is, you're never going to understand who I am. My dad is Abraham. You know, the Abraham. And I'm his son. the only one, Isaac. I would bet all of you here this morning that out of everybody in the whole Old Testament, my dad is probably the best known. There's been so much written about him, and over the last several thousand years, I have managed to read every single word. And if you ask me to sum up my father in one sentence, I'd have to pick that verse that's written about him by Paul. You know, the one in the New Testament that says, "And Abraham is the father of all those who walk in the footsteps of the faith of our father Abraham." That's what Paul calls him, our father Abraham. And he certainly deserves a title. But let me ask you a question. If people call my dad the father of the faith, wouldn't you think it's only fair that they would call me the son of the faith? I mean, after all, it was me who was on the cutting edge of the faith, under the knife, so to speak. Why do people always talk about my father? Why don't you ever hear people talking about me? You know, from the very beginning before the beginning of my life, God was involved with me. One day, he himself came to my soon-to-be parents' tent, told them they were going to have a son. What do you think my parents said when they heard that? "Oh, toda rabah, thank you very much." No. They laughed, the both of them, which is how I got my name, Isaac. Yitzchak, he laughs. How would you like to go through life with a name like he laughs? He laughs. Dinner time. He laughs. "I told you not to play so far from that tent. Come in just a little bit." Every time one of my parents called me, the whole neighborhood was reminded about their little lapse of faith. And in our house, faith was an important word. It was more than a word. It was the beginning of the story of my family. You see, one day Dad is living up in Haran when God came and spoke to him. Told him that he wanted Dad to go to this land, a new land, a land that Dad did not even know. And by faith, Dad gets up and goes. Now when he got there, God spoke to him a second time. Told him he was going to have more children than there were stars in the sky and sand on the seashore. Now at the time, Dad had only one son, Ishmael. And he was not even the son of his wife. But because Dad believed that God would do what he said, his name was changed. He used to be called Abram, the exalted father. But when he came to believe that God would do all these things, his name was changed to Abraham, the father of a multitude. And all of these things happened by faith. Now, it was exactly 1 year after that promise was made by God that I was born. And from the second I made my entrance, I was the favorite child, especially of my mother. Now, there are some Bible teachers today that will try to convince you that I was spoiled as a kid. It's absolutely untrue. I'm not going to tell you that being called the miracle kid didn't have any effect on me. You know, both my parents were way too old to have children. And whenever anybody saw me, they always said the same thing. "Hey, miracle kid, how are you?" But it's not my special birth that people remember me for. You know what sticks in the minds of most people when they hear my name? They remember when my father tried to sacrifice me. They remember that. I know. Probably a lot of you think that's a pretty upsetting idea. If you think you're upset, you should have been there the first time that my mother heard about it. Probably the best way to begin telling you the story is with the way that Moses himself chose. And Moses wrote this, "Vahi achar hadvarim ha'ila b'Elohim nisa et Avraham." And it came to pass after these things that God tested Abraham. You like that verse? God tested Abraham. It doesn't say anything about me getting tested. It's Abraham who gets tested. God told him he was to take me and bring me to this place called Moriah. Now, the first time I heard that word, it sounded strange to me. But since that day, this has become a very well-known place to everyone who studies the scriptures. First, and I think very important, is just the fact that I myself had been to this mountain. I think it makes it very special. You're not as impressed with me as I am. Okay, how about this? The writer of Chronicles wrote, "And Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah, where the Lord had appeared to his father David." Two special events that happened there. And there's even more. There's the time... I should probably save that for a little later in the story. Going to this mountain was one thing. What my father planned to do when we got there was a whole different story. God told him that he was to take me and offer me as a burnt sacrifice on the top of that mountain. Now, I don't know exactly where I was when God and my father were working out the little details of the plan. But if I had any idea what it was, I don't think I would have wanted to go. Who knew? Moses continues his story by writing this. "And early the next morning, Abraham got up." You think he would mention that I got up? Now, I am not a morning person. And for me to get up early, it is a very big sacrifice, and you would think that I would get half a verse. Nothing. Abraham gets up. He comes into the tent where I'm sleeping. Isaac, get up. We're going on a little trip." Trip? What kind of trip, Dad? What time is it anyway? It's still dark outside. Shh. Don't wake up your mother. What's the big secret, Dad? You come in the middle of the night, we're going off somewhere, I can't... Shh. Hurry up. Dad, would you mind if grabbed a bagel or something before we took off? I get up, get dressed, come out of the tent, and there's my father all ready to go on his trip. Two of his servants are with him, a donkey that is fully loaded with supplies, and Dad gets a little caravan together, and off we go to Mount Moriah. Almost. Because it was at that time that my mom did wake up. And one of the things my mother is known for, especially at that time of day, is being a very fast talker. And when she saw my father, she said to him, "Abi," that's what she called him, Abi. "Abi, where do you think you're going anymore? You're not a kid like when you're 44 kings. Everybody think we hang on Friday, wake up, do you understand what I'm saying to you?" Dad said nothing. And then Mom saw me. "And what do you think that boy's doing? He doesn't even have a jacket, he doesn't eat food. If I wake up by myself, I have no idea where you're going to Halloween. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" Dad still says nothing. Now, it wasn't often that my parents would have a disagreement. I mean, a big disagreement. But I could tell that this had the potential to become one of the biggest. And finally, Dad spoke. "Sarah, there's something that I must do, and the boy must come with me. Just trust me. We'll be gone for 1 week, and then we will return to you." And that, as they say, was that. The little caravan got together, and off we went to Mount Moriah. Now, from our home in Beersheba to this mountain was a 3-day journey, 60 miles. And from the second we left our tent until the second we got to that mountain, I talked constantly. I was really excited. I never went anywhere. Both of my boys, Jacob and Esau, have been more places than me. For me, going to this mountain was one exciting adventure. I didn't realize exactly how exciting it was going to be, but I was excited. And I was so excited that I never stopped talking the entire time, and I didn't realize my father didn't say a single word. Now, at the time, I thought Dad was just concentrating on where we were going. You know, if you got lost in our day, you didn't just pull your camel over and get some directions. You had some serious problems. But now I know what Dad was thinking about. For 3 days, 60 miles, he had only one thought on his mind. And that was, when we got to this mountain, he was going to sacrifice me. The afternoon of the third day, we started to draw close to that mountain, and the closer we got, the more excited my father became, and he rushed us on until that night we camped at the foot of Mount Moriah. Next morning, Dad got up and made something for us to eat, and he called the two servants over to him. Isaac and I are going to go up this mountain and worship God. And when we finish, we will return to you. Then my dad took some wood that he had cut, and he gave it to me to carry. He grabbed the fire. It was a small burning ember that we carried with us. And he took a knife, a big knife, and we started to climb up that mountain. One ancient rabbi wrote about this moment in my life. And this is what he wrote. Like one who carries on his own shoulder the stake upon which he is to be executed, so was Isaac as he carried the wood up that mountain. Was that true or what? You talk about the sacrificial lamb. If I had to pick two questions that people have asked me more than any other over the years, it's these two. Isaac, how did it feel when you were climbing that mountain? How could you have been so brave? How did it feel when I was climbing that mountain? Like I was climbing a mountain. How else could it feel? I had no idea that the wood I'm carrying was the same wood my father planned to burn me on. It was very easy to be brave as I climbed that mountain. However, I did notice one thing. You know, around our tent, a sacrifice was not an unusual experience. And one of the things I've learned about having a sacrifice is that it's crucial that you actually have something to sacrifice. And as we climbed that mountain, we seemed to be missing a very important item. I took a quick inventory. Wood, check. Fire, check. Knife, big knife, check. Sacrifice, no check. That might be a problem. So I decided to ask Dad as we climbed. Dad, I noticed you have me carrying the wood so we could burn the sacrifice, and you have the fire to light the wood for the sacrifice, and you brought that big knife to kill the sacrifice. Just wondering if you happen to notice, we don't seem to have any sacrifice. Dad looked at me like he never did before. And he said, God himself will provide the sacrifice. God will give us exactly what we need. And that was the first time I realized this was not going to be an ordinary sacrifice. But I didn't have much time to think about it. Because by that time we had reached the top of the mountain, and when we did, Dad seemed to know exactly where he was going. He put some stones together to build an altar. It took him no time. And when he finished, he said to me, Isaac, bring me that wood. And I brought the wood over to my father, and he took it. And he started to put it out on the altar, piece by piece. I had never seen my father do that before. And when all the wood was out on the altar, he stepped back, and he rearranged the wood, and he stepped back, and he rearranged the wood again. It took him forever. And finally, he seemed satisfied, and he said, Isaac, climb up on this wood. Excuse me. I came over, and I sat down. And as soon as I did, my father started to tie me up. He tied up my hands, and he tied up my feet. And in 2 minutes, I am lying bound head to foot on this altar. Now, over time, this action of my father has become known as the Akedah. Literally means the binding of Isaac. And I remember thinking very specifically as I lay on the altar, whew, I'm in a real bind. The Akedah. Almost sounds like some kind of official action or something. But to me, it was my dad. He was tying me up to sacrifice me. Several other ancient rabbis decided to comment this time in my life. And one wrote this. As Isaac lay on the altar, he called for his father to tighten the ropes even more. Because he was afraid. He was afraid that Abraham's hand might shake with grief, or that Isaac might move suddenly. And then the knife would only scar him, making him unfit to offer as a sacrifice. Another rabbi said, the fact that Isaac allowed himself to be bound shows his supreme faith, both in his father and in his God. You know how stories grow over time? I mean, it's true. I was a willing participant. But at the time, I just couldn't believe that it was my father and that he had tied me up to sacrifice me. And as I lay on that altar, for the first time in years, my thoughts turned to my brother Ishmael. Now, when we were little kids, we really didn't get along that well together. But I remember thinking, if there ever was a good time for him to show up, this was it. But he never came. It was just my dad and I alone on that mountain. The last thing I saw before I closed my eyes was the sun reflecting off the knife that my father held in his hands. And I closed my eyes and I lay on that altar for an eternity. And it was then we heard the voice. Abraham? Abraham! To which my father answers in his typical fashion, here I am. And then there was a very pregnant pause. And as I lay on the altar, my ears were almost coming off my head because I had a vested interest in the outcome of this conversation. And finally, the voice spoke for the second time. Do not lay a hand on that boy. Don't you touch him, because now I know that you fear God. And on the altar, I opened my eyes. And once again, the world seemed like a friendly place. Dad didn't speak. He just came over to me, and he untied me, and he grabbed me and held me so tight that I thought I was going to pass out. And while he held me, we heard a noise over in the bushes. And I looked over and saw a ram that was caught by its horn. Now, up until that time in my life, I had never realized what a beautiful creature a ram actually is. I love this ram. Dad still didn't say anything. He went over to that ram and he tied him up with the same cord that he had used on me. And he brought him over to the altar, and there he sacrificed him. And we watched as the smoke went up into heaven, and when it did, the voice spoke for the third time. Because you were willing to sacrifice your only son, I'm going to give you more children than there are stars in the sky and sand on the seashore. You will possess the gates of the cities of your enemies, and whoever blesses you, I will bless. And whoever curses you, I myself will curse. And it will be through you that every family on earth will receive a blessing. We heard those words, and we just fell down on our faces, and we worshiped God. And when we finished, we went back down that mountain, and we went home to Beersheba. And the whole way home, I made sure that Dad stayed just a little bit in front of me in case he had any other ideas for this trip that I didn't know about. I tell you, without a doubt, it was the most unusual thing that happened in my life. And I'll tell you the truth. For the life of me, I could not understand why God would let something like this happen. And to be more accurate, why would God command for it to happen? I've had a long time to think about it, and I finally come to understand a few things. The first is this whole idea about the resurrection of the dead. Do you know that there are people living even in this day who deny the resurrection of the dead? They always say things like, a person's born, they live their life, they die. Once you lie, that's the end of it. That kind of talk drives me crazy. How in the world do you think my father could have been willing to do what he did if he did not believe in the resurrection of the dead? And as a matter of fact, that's what the writer says about him in the book of Hebrews. He says, by faith, Abraham was willing to sacrifice his only son, promised to come through him, because he knew if it was necessary that God would raise him from the dead. And figuratively speaking, he did receive him back from the dead. The resurrection of the dead. There's no one who believes that more than my Father. But there's another reason. Maybe an even more important reason. I've come to see that God commanded this to happen so that he could give the world a picture. A picture of a father who had such great love that he was willing to sacrifice his only son in order to prove it. A father whose love was so deep that he took the one that he valued most in the universe and he gave him up so that no one could ever question the depths of his love. It was almost 2,000 years ago that my most famous descendant of all, the Messiah himself, climbed that same mountain range. But when he got to the top, there was no ram there to save him. He gave his life. But like me, his story didn't end on top of that mountain. He also came back from the mountain, came back from the dead, not figuratively, but literally, just so he could complete the picture for the world. The picture of a father who had such great love that he was willing to sacrifice his only son in order to prove it. The father whose love was so deep that he took the one that he valued most in the universe and he gave him up so that no one could ever question the depths of his love. I used to wonder if I knew what my father's plan was, would I have gone with him? I'll tell you. In order to have just a small part to play in the picture of the love that God has for the world, I would do it again in a second. It was the greatest privilege I had in my life. And I've also come to understand. What? I know, but I'm doing something. I just need it. I don't know. It's an hour at least. Yeah. Sorry. It's Mom. Ever since the little trip Dad and I went on, she gets real nervous if we're both out of her sight at the same time. Yeah, I just want to... No, I perfectly fine and... No, I'm sorry. This is my life. It's not your life. So unless I actually go, this is going to drive us all nuts. So let me go, but I want to leave you with a thought. A promise, really. I can promise you this. All of you who have placed your faith in Jesus, the Messiah, we're all going to have a chance to see each other again. And it's going to be in the world to come. Thank you. Mom, coming. Yeah, I'm on the way. Coming.